filthy mop out of my room!
Sir, I was just...
Are you deaf? You're just a walking bottle of floor cleaner. Don't meddle in my business.
Grant Holloway. 5 weeks of agony. 4 failed surgeons. Sweat crawled down his neck. Preston Taylor stood in the doorway. 18. Janitor uniform was still damp from the last floor he'd mopped.
Get back to your work! Or clean that stupid black brain of yours, too.
Preston didn't flinch. His eyes locked on Grant's right knee. The swelling, the angle, the guard pattern.
They got your diagnosis wrong.
Silence. Then Grant burst out laughing.
Interesting. Then heal my knee and I'll pay you $1 million.
The boy said nothing. But what his hands did 72 hours later left every surgeon in that hospital speechless. This is the story of Preston Taylor, and the night a mop bucket changed everything. 3rd Ward, Houston. The kind of neighborhood where potholes swallowed tires and streetlights worked every other block. A single-wide trailer sat at the end of Tuam Street, rust eating through its siding, a crooked mailbox out front with the name Taylor painted in white. Inside, Preston Taylor sat at a folding table, a second-hand anatomy textbook open to the musculoskeletal chapter. He'd read this page 40 times, 41 now. A notebook beside it, filled edge to edge with sketches of joints, ligaments, pressure points, all in his own hand, all cross-referenced with notes from his grandmother. Loretta Taylor stood at the kitchen counter, measuring insulin into a syringe. 72 years old, 30 years as a registered nurse before her knees gave out and the hospital let her go with a card and a sheet cake. But nursing was only half of what Loretta knew. The other half came from her mother, and her mother's mother before that. Generations of women in rural Louisiana who healed with their hands. Palpation, soft tissue work, pressure points mapped not from textbooks, but from 10,000 patients touched, felt, and mended. She had taught Preston everything since he was 10. Not because he asked, because his hands were different. The boy could feel what others couldn't. A tendon slightly out of line, a muscle guarding a fracture nobody had diagnosed. She tested him once when he was 12. Blindfolded, hands on a neighbor's shoulder. He found the torn rotator cuff in under a minute. The neighbor's doctor had missed it for 6 months. "You're burning through that bulb again," Loretta said without turning around. "Electricity bill doesn't pay itself." "Almost done, Grandma. You said that an hour ago." Preston closed the book. He looked at the insulin in her hand. 2 vials left. The pharmacy wanted $160 for the next refill. His janitor paycheck at St. Ambrose covered rent, groceries, and exactly 1 of her prescriptions. The other 2 he juggled month to month, picking whichever she needed most. His mother had died when he was 6, ovarian cancer. His father left 3 months after the funeral, drove to Dallas and never called again. Loretta had raised Preston on a nurse's pension and stubbornness. She never complained. She never asked for help. And she never once let him believe he was less than anyone. "Grandma, when you worked at the hospital, did the doctors ever listen to the nurses?" Loretta pulled the syringe cap off with her teeth. "The good ones did. The rest pretended we were furniture." "What about someone like me? No degree, no license." "Baby, the knee doesn't care who's touching it. It only cares if you know what you're doing." She pushed the needle into her arm, steady as a surgeon. "And you do." St. Ambrose Private Hospital sat 14 miles and an entire world away from 3rd Ward. Glass towers, valet parking, suites with Egyptian cotton sheets that cost more per night than Preston earned in a month. The VIP floor occupied the entire 8th level, private chefs, personal concierges, and Dr. Victor Spence. Spence was 55, board-certified in orthopedic surgery, and the personal physician to half the oil money in Houston. He wore custom scrubs with his initials embroidered on the pocket. He did not take kindly to second opinions. He took even less kindly to second opinions from janitors. Then there was Derek Holloway, 30 years old, Grant's only son and acting manager of Holloway Estates since the accident. Slim suits, cold smile. Derek had spent 5 weeks watching his father deteriorate, and 5 weeks quietly moving contracts, signatures, and authorization codes into his own name. Every day Grant stayed in that hospital bed was another day Derek operated unchecked. And at the center of it all, Grant Holloway himself. 58, self-made billionaire, 3 commercial towers in downtown Houston, a polo ranch in Katy, and a reputation for crushing anyone who wasted his time. The accident had broken more than his knee. It had trapped a man who controlled everything inside a body he could no longer control. He fired nurses for walking too loudly. He threw a breakfast tray at a physical therapist. He told his own son to stop visiting because Derek's cologne gave him migraines. Nurse Helen Moore was the only one who lasted. 40 years old, 15 years in critical care, and the kind of patience that came from raising 4 boys alone. She changed Grant's dressings without flinching when he cursed. She adjusted his pillows when he threw them. And she was the one who had seen Preston help the old man on the 3rd floor, pressing 2 points on his lower back, whispering instructions on how to shift his weight, and watching the man sleep peacefully for the first time in a week. Helen remembered that. She would remember it again very soon. It started 2 weeks before the night in Grant's room. Preston was mopping the 3rd floor hallway, 1 a.m., when he heard the tapping. Soft, rhythmic, desperate. A knuckle against a bed rail. Room 312. An 81-year-old man named Arthur Weeks, 3 days post-hip replacement, hadn't slept more than 20 minutes at a stretch. The pain medication made him nauseous. The nausea kept him awake. The sleeplessness made the pain worse. A vicious loop that no one on the night shift had time to untangle. Preston leaned his mop against the wall and stepped inside. "Mr. Weeks, can't sleep?" The old man's eyes were glassy. 5 nights. I just want 5 minutes without this burning in my back. Preston looked at the way Arthur held himself. Tilted left, shoulders hiked, lower back arched away from the mattress. Classic compensation pattern. The hip was healing fine. The problem was his lumbar spine, locked up from days of lying in a position that protected the surgical site but tortured everything above it. "Can I try something? I won't touch your hip, just your back." Arthur nodded. At that point, he would have agreed to anything. Preston placed 2 fingers on the erector spinae, just left of L3. Pressed. Held. Shifted a 1/4 inch lateral and pressed again. Then he guided Arthur's knees to the side, a gentle rotational stretch that decompressed the facet joints. 30 seconds. Arthur exhaled like a man surfacing from underwater. "Now try turning onto your right side, slowly. Pillow between your knees." Arthur turned. His face changed. Confusion first, then something close to disbelief. The burning was gone. Not dulled. Gone. "How did you—" "Just rest, Mr. Weeks." Arthur Weeks slept 4 hours straight that night. Helen Moore found him in the morning, snoring peacefully, the mop bucket still parked outside his door. She looked at it for a long time. 2 weeks later, Preston stood in the VIP hallway again. This time, the sounds from Grant Holloway's room were louder. Not tapping, but groaning, punctuated by the crash of something hitting a wall. A water pitcher, it turned out. Grant had hurled it at the nightstand. Preston opened the door. That was when the exchange from the hook happened. The insults, the diagnosis comment, the $1 million dare. Then, Preston left. He thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The next morning, Derek Holloway reviewed the 8th floor security footage as part of his daily routine, a habit he'd developed not to protect his father, but to control who got access to him. He spotted Preston entering the room at 2:07 a.m., staying for 93 seconds. Derek was waiting in the service corridor when Preston arrived for his shift that evening. "You're the janitor who walked into my father's room last night." Preston kept his eyes down. "I heard him in pain. I just wanted to—" "You wanted to what? Play doctor?" Derek stepped closer. His cologne hit first. Sharp, expensive, suffocating. "You push a mop for a living. You don't diagnose. You don't touch. You don't even speak to patients on that floor. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Look at me when I'm talking to you." Preston looked up. Derek held his phone at arm's length, snapped a photo of Preston's face. "Insurance purposes, in case anything goes missing from the VIP wing." He smiled the way people smile when they know you can't hit back. "Go mop something." Preston walked away. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from the effort of holding still. It got worse the next day. Dr. Spence called Preston into the staff conference room on the second floor. 3 nurses were seated along the wall. None of them looked at Preston when he entered. Spence stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, reading glasses perched on his forehead like a crown. "Mr. Taylor, I've been informed that you made an unsolicited medical comment to a patient on the VIP floor. I said I thought his diagnosis might be—" "Stop!" Spence held up one finger. "You are a janitor. Your job is to empty trash cans and mop floors. You are not qualified to comment on the weather, let alone a complex orthopedic case managed by 4 board-certified surgeons." He leaned forward. "If I hear that you've spoken to any patient on any floor about anything beyond 'excuse me' and 'have a nice day,' I will personally ensure you never work in a medical facility in the state of Texas. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir." "You may go." Preston pushed through the stairwell door and sat on the concrete steps. The fluorescent light above him buzzed and flickered. He pressed his palms against his knees and breathed. In his pocket, the corner of his notebook poked against his thigh. 200 pages of everything his grandmother had ever taught him, everything he'd studied on his own, every patient he'd quietly helped. Worth nothing, apparently. Less than nothing. That night, he sat at the folding table in the trailer and told Loretta everything. She listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold. "What did you feel in his knee?" she asked. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry." What did you feel? Preston described it. The swelling pattern didn't match standard osteoarthritis or post-traumatic inflammation. The way Grant guarded the medial side suggested something mechanical, not just inflammatory. A loose body, maybe. A fragment wedged near the collateral ligament. Something an MRI taken at the standard angle would miss entirely. Loretta set down her mug. "Then you know what you know." "Knowing doesn't matter if nobody lets you." "The knee doesn't care who's touching it, Preston. It only cares if you know what you're doing." She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her fingers were thin, paper-skinned, spotted with age, but steady, always steady. "And you do." Preston stared at the notebook. 200 pages. No degree, no license. No one who would listen. Not yet. Real talk. Imagine you know you can help someone. You've already proved it. And they still tell you to shut up and mop the floor. Not because you're wrong, because of what you're wearing. How many times do you get back up before you stop trying? 3 days later, Grant Holloway's body decided it was done waiting. His temperature spiked at 11 p.m., 101.4, then 102.1 by midnight. The knee ballooned to nearly twice its normal size, skin stretched tight and shiny, hot to the touch even through the bedsheet. Dr. Spence ordered 1-5 antibiotics and a cortisone injection. Neither worked. Grant lay rigid in the dark, jaw clamped, both hands white-knuckling the side rails. At 1 a.m., Spence called an emergency consult with the surgical team. Their recommendation? Immediate arthroscopic surgery to drain fluid and assess for infection. Grant refused. He'd already refused 4 times in 5 weeks. "Cut me open and I might never walk again," he said through gritted teeth. "Find another way or get out." Spence had no other way. He adjusted the morphine drip, dimmed the lights, and left the room. In the hallway, he passed Helen Moore without a word. Helen stood at the nurse's station, watching Grant's vitals on the monitor. Heart rate elevated, blood pressure climbing, pain score self-reported at 9 out of 10, and Grant Holloway was not a man who admitted to pain easily. She picked up her phone. Preston answered on the second ring. He was sitting on the trailer steps, notebook open on his knee, studying by the porch light because the kitchen bulb had finally burned out. "The Billionaire on 8, Helen said. He's getting worse. Fever, swelling, the whole thing escalating. Spence is out of ideas. Silence on the line. You told him his diagnosis was wrong. Did you mean it? Yes, ma'am. Then what do you think it actually is? Preston hesitated, not because he doubted himself, because he knew what would happen if he said it out loud to someone who might actually listen. I think there's a loose body. A small bone fragment, probably from the original fracture, sitting near the medial collateral ligament. It's causing mechanical irritation. That's why the inflammation won't stop, and the anti-inflammatories aren't working. It's not a chemical problem. It's a physical one. A pebble in a shoe. Helen was quiet for 3 seconds. And the MR, I didn't catch it? Standard angle wouldn't. You'd need a valgus stress view. Knee slightly bent. Pressure on the lateral side to open the medial compartment. The fragment is probably 8, maybe 10 millimeters, sitting right in the blind spot. Helen closed her eyes. 15 years in critical care had taught her when someone was guessing and when someone was certain. Preston Taylor was not guessing. I can get you into the room, but I can't protect you if it goes wrong. I understand. 1 examination. Hands only. No treatment. If you find something, I'll push for a new scan. If you don't, you walk away, and we never had this conversation. Fair. Preston arrived at St. Ambrose at 2:15 a.m. Not through the main entrance, but through the service elevator in the basement, the one that smelled like laundry detergent and recycled air. Helen met him on the 8th floor with a visitor badge that she'd signed under a name that wasn't his. Grant was barely conscious. The fever had pulled him into a shallow, restless half-sleep. His right leg lay propped on 2 pillows, the knee wrapped in cooling pads that weren't cooling much of anything. Preston stood at the bedside. He flexed his fingers, took a breath. Then he placed both hands on Grant's knee. He started the way Loretta had taught him, superior to inferior, lateral to medial. Fingertips reading the tissue like braille. Swelling here, heat there, muscle guarding everywhere. He moved slowly, methodically, pressing just enough to feel what lay beneath without adding pain. 4 minutes in, he found it. A hard point. Small. Irregular. Sitting just below the joint line on the medial side, tucked against the collateral ligament. Not cartilage, too dense. Not a cyst, too solid. A fragment. Bone. Exactly where he'd predicted. There, Preston whispered. Right there. Grant's eyes opened. For the first time in 5 weeks, someone had touched his knee, and he hadn't screamed. What did you do? Grant's voice was hoarse, confused. Nothing yet, but I know what's wrong. Preston looked him in the eye. You don't need a knee replacement, Mr. Holloway. You need a 20-minute scope to pull out a piece of bone that shouldn't be there. And you need an MRI taken from an angle none of your doctors thought to try. Grant stared at the boy in the borrowed visitor badge. The janitor. The kid he'd thrown out 72 hours ago. Prove it, Grant said. Grant Holloway did something he hadn't done in 5 weeks. He picked up the phone himself. Get radiology on the line, now. I want a new MRI, and I want it done the way this kid tells them to do it. Dr. Spence arrived at 6 a.m., coffee in hand, expecting another routine morning of adjusting drip rates and dodging Grant's temper. Instead, he found Preston Taylor sitting in the chair beside the bed, notebook open, sketching a diagram of the knee joint with the proposed imaging angle marked in red ink. What is he doing here? He's here because I said so, Grant replied. Order an MRI, valgus stress view. I want it done before noon. Spence set his coffee down slowly. Mr. Holloway, I've managed your care for 3 years. A valgus stress MRI is an unusual protocol for this type of... Victor, 4 surgeons told me I need a new knee. This kid says I need a 20-minute scope. One of you is wrong, and right now my money's on the kid. Order the scan, or I'll find someone who will. The scan was completed at 11:14 a.m. The radiologist called Spence's office 17 minutes later. The report confirmed a loose body, an osteochondral fragment measuring 8.3 millimeters, lodged in the medial compartment of the knee, directly adjacent to the collateral ligament. exactly where Preston had said, exactly the size he'd estimated. The standard MRI protocol used in all 4 previous scans had missed it entirely, because the fragment sat in a position only visible under valgus stress. Spence read the report twice, then a third time. Then he closed his office door. When he emerged, he did not go to Grant's room. He went to the second floor, to the office of Dr. Alan Frost, the hospital's chief of medical staff. "We have a situation on 8, Spence said. "An unlicensed individual has been performing physical examinations on a patient. A janitor, 18 years old, no medical credentials whatsoever." Frost frowned. How did a janitor get access to a VIP patient? Nurse Moore. She facilitated it. And the patient? Consented. But he's compromised. Fever, pain, possible delirium. He's not in a state to make sound decisions about his own care. Spence was building a case. Not to protect Grant, to protect himself. Because the MRI had just proven that Victor Spence, Harvard-trained, board-certified, $15,000 per consultation, had missed what a teenager with a notebook had found by touch. Derek Holloway arrived at the hospital at 2 p.m. He'd already spoken with Spence by phone. The two men had never been allies before, but desperation creates strange partnerships. Derek found his father sitting up in bed, the most upright he'd been in weeks. Preston was beside him, explaining the fragment's location using a printed copy of the new MRI, pointing with a pencil eraser. "Dad, a word, privately." Grant waved Preston out. Derek closed the door. "This kid is a liability. He has no license, no degree, no insurance. If something goes wrong, if he touches your knee the wrong way and you lose mobility, the hospital is exposed, our family is exposed, and we can't sue a janitor who owns nothing." He found what Spence missed. A lucky guess. He described the fragment's location, shape, and size before the scan. That's not luck. That's knowledge. Derek shifted tactics. "Dad, I'm trying to protect you. This boy, we don't know where he comes from. We don't know what he wants. People like that, they see someone like you and they see a payday." "People like what, Derek?" Derek paused. He'd stepped on a line he knew better than to cross in front of his father. At least, in front of the version of his father who was paying attention. "I just mean, he's not qualified. Neither were you when I gave you the company. And look what you've done with it." Grant's eyes were sharper than they'd been in weeks. The fever was breaking. The fragment hadn't shifted, and something about the way his son kept pushing felt less like concern and more like strategy. Derek left the room without another word. In the elevator, he dialed a number. "Alan, it's Derek Holloway. I want to file a formal complaint with the Texas Medical Board. Unlicensed practice of medicine at St. Ambrose. The subject is a janitor named Preston Taylor." Meanwhile, Preston sat in the break room on the first floor, eating a vending machine sandwich when Helen found him. Spence went to the chief of staff. "He's framing this as you practicing without a license." Preston put the sandwich down. "And Derek just filed a complaint with the state medical board." Preston stared at the table. The vinyl was peeling at the corner. He pressed his thumb against it, pushing it flat. It curled back up. "What happens now?" "Now we need someone with actual credentials to stand behind you. Someone the board can't dismiss." Helen pulled out her phone. "I'm calling Nina Ashford." Dr. Nina Ashford arrived at St. Ambrose the next morning, carrying a box of files. 23 patient records from the 3rd Ward Free Clinic, each one annotated with notes about Preston's involvement. Faster recovery times, pain reduction without medication changes, one elderly woman with chronic sciatica who'd been wheelchair-bound for a year and walked out of the clinic on her own legs after 3 sessions with Preston. Ashford met with Grant, Helen, and Preston in the VIP suite. She laid the files on the rolling table beside Grant's untouched lunch. "I've supervised Preston informally for 8 months. His palpation skills are extraordinary, better than most residents I've trained. His knowledge of musculoskeletal anatomy is self-taught but remarkably accurate. and his grandmother's techniques are rooted in osteopathic principles that predate the formal discipline by a century. She looked at Grant. He's not a doctor. But what he did for your knee? Finding that fragment by hand? I've seen fellowship-trained orthopedists miss exactly that. Grant looked at Preston. You've been doing this for 8 months and nobody noticed? Preston shrugged. People don't usually watch the janitor. Grant didn't smile, but something behind his eyes shifted, the way a lock turns when the right key finally finds it. All right, here's what's going to happen. Grant sat up straighter. Dr. Ashford supervises. Preston assists with my pre-surgical recovery. Soft tissue work, mobility exercises, whatever he and his grandmother think will help. Everything documented, everything on camera. And when the medical board comes asking, they'll find a licensed physician of record and a patient who consented with full mental capacity. He looked at Spence's empty chair. And someone get Victor on the phone. He either cooperates or he resigns. His choice. Loretta Taylor appeared on the iPad screen at 7 p.m. that evening. The video call was Preston's idea. He needed her guidance for the first session. Loretta sat in the trailer kitchen, the same folding table behind her, the same dim light. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the tablet, but her voice did not. Start at the superior margin, both thumbs. Feel for the heat gradient. It'll tell you where the inflammation peaks. Preston followed, hands on Grant's knee, thumbs tracing the swelling line. Good. Now inferior. Slow. Let the tissue talk to you. Grant watched the boy's face. The concentration, the stillness, the absolute absence of hesitation. Whatever this was, it wasn't performance. It wasn't luck. It was something learned, practiced, and earned through years of repetition that no diploma could replace. Loretta's voice came through the speaker, thin but unwavering. Your hands know more than you think, baby. Trust what they tell you. Preston pressed, held, released, pressed again. Grant exhaled. For the first time in 5 weeks, his knee didn't fight back. 48 hours. That was all Preston had been given. And in 48 hours, the impossible happened. Grant Holloway stood up, not leaning on a rail, not clutching Helen's arm. He swung both legs off the bed, planted his feet on the cold tile floor, and pushed himself upright. His right knee trembled, but held. He took one step, then another, then a third, then 7 more, all the way to the window overlooking downtown Houston. He stood there for a full minute, breathing. 14 floors below, his name was on 2 of those buildings. 5 weeks ago, he thought he'd never walk through their lobbies again. 10 steps, Helen whispered from the doorway. She was already crying. Word traveled the way it always does in hospitals. Not through official channels, but through break rooms, elevator conversations, and group texts that weren't supposed to exist. By noon, every floor at St. Ambrose knew. The janitor on the night shift had found what 4 surgeons missed. The janitor's grandmother had taught him something that worked. The billionaire in Suite 812 was walking. Doctors came to look. Some out of curiosity, some out of disbelief, a few out of professional jealousy they would never admit. They stood in the hallway, leaning against walls, watching through the half-open door as Preston guided Grant through a second round of mobility exercises. Gentle rotations, controlled weight-bearing, soft tissue work along the medial compartment. Dr. Ashford scheduled a formal presentation before the hospital's medical review board for the following morning. She spent the night preparing. Her case was straightforward. Preston Taylor possessed an exceptional gift for diagnostic palpation, the ability to detect structural abnormalities through touch with a precision that exceeded most trained clinicians. His knowledge, while self-taught, was grounded in legitimate osteopathic principles transmitted through his grandmother's lineage. His interventions at the free clinic had produced documented, measurable results across 23 patients. She presented for 40 minutes. The board listened. Some nodded. Some took notes. Dr. Howard Garner, chief of geriatric medicine, asked to see the MRI comparison, the standard view versus the valgus stress view. When the fragment appeared on the second image, exactly where Preston had said it would be, Garner leaned back in his chair and said nothing for a long time. Then, Derek Holloway walked in. He hadn't been invited. He didn't need to be. Derek had spent the previous 24 hours on the phone, with the hospital's legal department, with the Texas Medical Board, and with a healthcare attorney whose retainer cost more per hour than Preston earned in a week. "Ladies and gentlemen," Derek said, settling into a chair at the back of the room, "I appreciate Dr. Ashford's enthusiasm, but this hospital is allowing an unlicensed, uninsured 18-year-old custodial employee to perform hands-on interventions on patients. That's not a feel-good story. That's a liability." He placed a manila folder on the table. "Formal complaint. Filed yesterday. The state board has acknowledged receipt." The room temperature dropped. Dr. Frost, the chief of staff, spoke first. "Derek, your father consented to—" "My father was running a fever of 102 when he consented. His judgment was compromised. Any lawyer will argue that." Derek smiled. The same cold smile from the hallway. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I'm trying to protect this institution." Ashford didn't flinch. "Then let's give the institution something to evaluate. A supervised clinical demonstration. 1 patient, 1 session, full documentation. If Preston produces a measurable result under controlled conditions, the board has grounds to continue. If he doesn't, we stop." Derek spread his hands. "Fine by me. I'm sure 1 demonstration will settle this." He was sure. But not the way Ashford intended. Derek had already called the patient coordinator to recommend the most difficult case on the hospital's roster. A woman who had defeated every specialist, every surgery, every treatment plan thrown at her for 3 years. If Preston failed publicly, the complaint would stick, and the boy would be gone. The board voted 7-2 in favor of the demonstration. 1 session, 1 patient, full observation, Preston was told that evening. He sat on the edge of Grant's bed, a place that would have been unthinkable a week ago, and listened as Helen explained the terms. "Who's the patient?" "Margaret Cole, 68, frozen shoulder, 3 years, 2 failed surgeries. She doesn't trust anyone in a white coat anymore." Preston looked at his hands. The same hands that had mopped this floor 6 days ago. "When?" "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. The whole board will be watching." Preston nodded. He didn't sleep that night. Room 804, 9 in the morning. Every chair taken. 7 board members along the far wall. Dr. Frost in the center, legal pad open. Dr. Garner to his left. Dr. Ashford beside the examination table with a clipboard and digital goniometer. 2 hospital cameras recorded from opposite corners. A stenographer typed in real time. Derek Holloway sat in the back row, legs crossed, phone flat on his thigh. He'd positioned himself where Preston would see him every time he looked up. A reminder. A dare. Dr. Spence stood near the door, arms folded, jaw tight. He hadn't spoken to Preston since the conference room threat. He didn't plan to start now. And in the center of all of it, Margaret Cole. 68 years old, silver hair pulled back with a rubber band, a cardigan 2 sizes too large because lifting her arms to put on anything fitted had become impossible 3 years ago. Her right arm pressed against her ribs like a splint, guarding a wound that never closed. 2 surgeries, 18 months of physical therapy, cortisone injections, nerve blocks, cryotherapy, acupuncture. Nothing gave more than a few hours of relief before the shoulder seized again. 3 specialists had written the same phrase in her chart: treatment-resistant adhesive capsulitis. Her orthopedist told her gently to adjust her expectations. Learn to live with reduced mobility. Manage the pain. Margaret hadn't adjusted. She'd stopped. Stopped playing piano. The Steinway upright that Ray had bought her for their 30th anniversary. The one thing that kept her breathing after he died of a stroke 4 years ago. Stopped visiting her grandchildren because she couldn't raise her arms to hold them. Stopped answering the phone because every caller eventually asked about the shoulder, and she had no answer that didn't make her cry. Helen had convinced her to come. Not by promising a miracle, by saying, "There's a young man who just wants to listen. That's all." Preston entered at 9:02 a.m. Clean white shirt, dark pants. Loretta had ironed them that morning at the folding table, steam rising in the dim kitchen light. His notebook sat in his back pocket. His hands looked steady. His heartbeat was not. He didn't approach the table first. He pulled a chair across the tile. Metal legs scraped, and the sound made everyone flinch except Margaret, and sat down facing her. Close enough to talk. Far enough that she didn't feel cornered. "Mrs. Cole, I'm Preston. I know who you are, the janitor. Not malice, a fact, stated like a temperature reading. Yes, ma'am. You're 18. Yes, ma'am. And you think you can fix what 2 surgeons and $100,000 couldn't? I don't know if I can fix it, but I'd like to understand it first. Can you tell me about the pain?" Margaret studied him. The stillness, the way he sat without fidgeting, without glancing at the board members, without performing competence for the cameras. Something about that unlocked a door she'd bricked shut a long time ago. It started 3 months after Ray died. I woke up one morning and couldn't lift my arm past my chest. The doctors said capsulitis, inflammation, scar tissue building up inside the joint. She paused, voice dropping. But I think my body just decided to hold on to something, because everything else was already gone. The room went silent. Even the stenographer's fingers stopped. Preston nodded. He didn't offer a platitude. Didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "I understand." He said, "Can I see where it hurts most?" Margaret unbuttoned the top of her cardigan and exposed her right shoulder. The skin was pale, slightly swollen around the deltoid. Preston moved behind her, placed his left hand flat on the scapula and his right on the anterior capsule. He closed his eyes. His fingers moved the way Loretta had taught, slow, deliberate, mapping. The superficial tissue was tight but workable. Beneath it, the joint capsule was thick, fibrotic, contracted like a fist. He pressed deeper. Margaret drew a sharp breath. He eased the pressure, shifted a half-inch inferior, pressed again. Deeper still. Past the capsule. Into the inferior recess, the lowest, hardest-to-reach pocket of the glenohumeral joint. And there it was. A band of adhesion so dense it felt like a guitar string pulled to the edge of snapping. 2 surgeries had addressed the superior and anterior capsule. Neither had gone deep enough to reach this. The scar tissue had regrown around the untouched band and welded the joint shut from the inside. Preston opened his eyes. "Mrs. Cole, I'm going to do something that will be uncomfortable for about 10 seconds. After that, I need you to breathe out, all the way out, and let your arm go completely heavy. Can you do that?" She nodded. Her eyes were locked on the far wall. Trusting a stranger one more time, with almost nothing left in the account. Preston positioned his right thumb at the inferior margin of the glenohumeral capsule. Left hand anchored the scapula. He pressed, firm, sustained, precise, directly into the adhesion, not guessing, not hoping, knowing. Margaret gasped. Her left hand shot to the table edge, knuckles white. "Breathe out, all the way. Let it go heavy." She exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to empty not just her lungs, but 3 years of held-in grief. Her arm dropped, and something inside the joint, something that had been frozen since the morning she woke up alone for the first time, released. A soft, wet shift, like a knuckle cracking under water. The adhesion had separated, not completely, but enough. "Now lift your arm, slowly. Don't force it." Margaret raised her right arm, past her chest, past her shoulder line, past her ear, all the way up until her fingertips pointed at the ceiling. She stared at her own hand like she'd never seen it before. Her mouth opened. Tears fell before sound came. "Oh, God." Her voice cracked wide open. "Oh, my God. I can move it." She brought her arm down and lifted it again, and again, and again. A 68-year-old woman raising her arm like a child discovering she could fly. Dr. Ashford stepped forward with the goniometer. Baseline from intake, 62 degrees of active flexion. Current, 114 degrees. a gain of 52 degrees in a single session. Dr. Garner stood up. He began clapping, slowly at first. Then Helen joined. Then Ashford. Then the stenographer, who had to set her hands free to do it. One by one, the room followed. Board members, nurses, camera operators. Everyone except Derek. And Spence. Margaret reached for Preston's hand with both of hers. Her grip was fierce. "First time in 3 years I can lift my arm without screaming." Her chin trembled. "How do I pay you?" "You don't. Just play piano again." She laughed through tears, the kind of laugh that sounds like it's been caged for years, and finally found the door open. The applause hadn't fully died when Derek walked out. In the corridor, he called the hospital's IT department, requesting remote access to his father's email. Family emergency authorization. He was told no. What Derek didn't know: Grant Holloway had been watching his son for 5 days. Not just the visits, the patterns. The way Derek resisted every intervention that might speed recovery. The way his advice always ended the same: "Let me handle things, Dad. You rest." Grant had asked Helen a quiet favor the night before, while Preston was out of the room. "The laptop my son left in the chair. He thinks I was sleeping when he used it. I wasn't." Helen found the evidence that night. 3 commercial property contracts, total value $12 million, transferred from Holloway Estates to a shell company registered under Derek's personal attorney, all executed during the 5 weeks Grant was bedridden, all bearing a forged digital signature. That afternoon, Derek returned to find Grant sitting by the window. Not in bed, in a chair. Dressed in real clothes for the first time in 5 weeks. The IV stand pushed to the corner like a piece of furniture that no longer belonged. "Sit down, Derek." "Dad, Sit down." Derek sat. "You wanted me weak." Grant's voice was low, controlled, the voice of a man who built an empire by knowing exactly when to speak and when to strike. "You wanted me in that bed, because every day I couldn't walk, you were stealing from me." "That's not—" "I saw the emails, every single one. 3 contracts, $12 million. My signature, forged." Grant leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes unblinking. "You turned on the one person who was trying to get me back on my feet, because a healthy father was bad for business." Derek's face drained, not red, white. The color of a man who realizes the floor beneath him has been glass the entire time, and it just cracked. Grant turned to the doorway where Spence had been standing long enough to hear every word. "And you, Victor, you knew the standard MRI was incomplete. You chose not to order the valgus view because an unresolved diagnosis kept me in this bed and kept your billing active. How much did my son promise you?" Spence opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. "Both of you, out of this hospital. My attorneys will handle the rest." Derek stood. His legs were shaking. He walked to the door, paused, and turned one last time. "Dad, the janitor did more for me in 5 days than you did in 30 years. Get out of my sight." The door closed. The room was quiet. Grant sat by the window and looked at the skyline, his buildings, his name, his city. Then he looked at his knee, bent, resting, painless for the first time in 6 weeks. He picked up the phone and dialed his personal attorney. "Draw up a check. $1 million. Payable to Preston Taylor." The arthroscopic surgery took 22 minutes. Dr. Caroline Webb, a sports medicine specialist Grant's attorney had flown in from the Mayo Clinic overnight, performed the scope using the exact coordinates Preston had mapped. The fragment was 8.3 millimeters, osteochondral, wedged against the medial collateral ligament in precisely the position Preston had identified by touch 5 days earlier. She extracted it with a single pass. Grant woke from anesthesia at 4 p.m. By 6 p.m., he was sitting up. By 8 p.m., he was standing. By the next morning, he walked from his bed to the bathroom without assistance, the first time in nearly 6 weeks that his right knee had supported his full weight without pain. 72 hours after surgery, Grant Holloway walked the length of the 8th floor hallway. No cane, no walker, no hand on the wall. Nurses lined the corridor and watched in silence. Helen stood at the far end, arms crossed, smiling the kind of smile that costs years of patience to earn. Grant returned to his room and called Preston. The boy arrived still wearing his janitor uniform. He'd come straight from mopping the 3rd floor. There was a faint smell of floor cleaner on his sleeves. He stood in the doorway, unsure whether to sit. Grant gestured to the chair beside the bed. On the rolling table between them sat a single item, a cashier's check. $1 million, Grant said. I laughed when I made that bet. I thought I was mocking you. Turns out I was making the smartest investment of my life. Preston stared at the check, his name printed in block letters. More zeros than he'd ever seen outside a textbook. I didn't come here for money, Mr. Holloway. I know. Grant leaned back. That's exactly why you deserve every cent of it. Preston picked up the check. His hands trembled, not from nerves, but from the weight of what it meant. Loretta's insulin. The pharmacy bills. The application fee for Baylor he'd been saving for since sophomore year. The trailer's leaking roof that buckled every time it rained. He folded the check once, placed it in his shirt pocket, and pressed his palm flat against it. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. You earned it. Every dollar. The news broke before Grant left the hospital. A nurse on the 4th floor, nobody found out who, recorded 30 seconds of the Margaret Cole session on a personal phone. The video showed an elderly woman lifting her arm above her head for the first time in 3 years, gripping the hand of an 18-year-old in a white shirt. It hit Twitter at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, 14 million views. #HealingHands trended nationwide. Then #PrestonTaylor. Then #OneTouch, pulled from the headline every outlet ran with. Local news first, then CNN, then the kind of daytime shows where hosts cry on camera and call it journalism. The hospital released a statement crediting a collaborative care approach involving multiple clinicians. Nobody bought it. The internet had chosen its hero, and his name was on a janitor's badge. Grant Holloway held a press conference 3 days after discharge, standing, walking, bending his right knee in front of 40 reporters. Navy suit, no brace. Behind him, a banner, Taylor Healing Foundation. 4 surgeons told me I needed a new knee. An 18-year-old janitor told me I needed a new perspective. He was right. They were wrong. He paused. This foundation will fund full medical scholarships for young people from underserved communities, starting with Preston Taylor. Preston enrolled at Baylor College of Medicine that fall on a full-ride pre-med scholarship. He walked into the lecture hall carrying the same notebook, 200 pages of Loretta's teachings, plus his own annotations. When he told the class he'd been a hospital janitor 6 months ago and had diagnosed an osteochondral fragment by palpation that 4 MRI scans missed, the room went quiet. Then it turned into something else entirely. Loretta Taylor received an invitation she never expected. Baylor's Department of Integrative Medicine asked her to guest lecture on traditional manual therapy. She arrived in a wheelchair, knees worse, eyesight down to a magnifying glass, but her hands were steady and her voice filled the room. She demonstrated palpation on a volunteer, narrating each movement the way she'd narrated them to Preston over the kitchen table for 8 years. The faculty gave her a standing ovation. She told Helen it was the first time anyone with a medical degree had treated her knowledge as worth writing down. Margaret Cole played piano again. Claire de Lune, the piece Ray loved most, at a Taylor Foundation fundraiser. Preston sat front row. When she finished, Margaret lifted both arms above her head and held them there, eyes closed. The audience didn't know why that mattered. Preston did. Helen Moore became director of nursing for the VIP wing. She accepted on one condition. Janitors would no longer be prohibited from speaking to patients. Dr. Spence surrendered his Texas medical license before the investigation concluded. He moved to a consulting firm in Arizona and never practiced surgery again. Derek Holloway was indicted on 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of forgery. Assets frozen. Grant removed his name from every document, every trust, every line of inheritance. When reporters asked about prosecuting his own son, Grant said, "He made his choices. I'm making mine." The $1 million check cleared on a Friday. Preston paid off Loretta's medical bills first. Insulin, blood pressure medication, the eye specialist she'd avoided for 2 years. Then the trailer roof, the one that buckled every time it rained. The rest went into savings earmarked for medical school. It rained that weekend in 3rd Ward. For the first time in years, nothing inside the Taylor trailer got wet. 6 months later, Preston Taylor stood at a podium in the Baylor College of Medicine auditorium. 300 first-year students, faculty along the back wall. On the table beside him, a notebook. 200 pages, edges worn soft, covers stained with coffee rings and floor cleaner. Every page filled with Loretta's voice in Preston's handwriting. He didn't open with credentials. He opened with a question. How many of you have ever been told you don't belong somewhere? Hands rose. A few, then most of the room. I was told that every day for 2 years, not always in words, in looks, in the way people stepped around me like I was furniture. A janitor doesn't have ears, apparently. Uncomfortable laughter. But every time they ignored me, I was learning. Every chart left open, every patient crying in a room they thought was empty, I was paying attention. Not because I was trying to be a doctor, because I couldn't stop caring. He looked at the back row. Grant Holloway sat in a gray sweater, right knee bent comfortably. No brace, no limp. Just a man who owed his mobility to the person at the podium. Talent doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't need a title or a lab coat. It just needs someone brave enough to use it when nobody believes it's there. Silence. Then Grant started clapping. Alone at first. Then the row ahead. Then the auditorium. Preston looked down at the notebook. Ran his thumb along the worn spine. Somewhere in 3rd Ward, Loretta sat at the kitchen table, insulin syringe beside her, listening to the live stream on a phone propped against the sugar jar. She was smiling. I told this story because Preston proved something real. 4 surgeons couldn't fix that knee. A broke, black, 18-year-old janitor did, with his bare hands. No degree, no fancy tools, just knowledge passed down from his grandma in a trailer. Never judge someone by their uniform. If this story gave you chills, drop a comment. Tell me about a time someone counted you out. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because the next story might hit even harder.